Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and I'm delighted to have Kate Hubert back. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Anna. Lovely to be back.
Well, it had to happen because I so loved your book, Body of Stars. And when you were when we last spoke, we were talking about it and we were talking about the mind-body connection. But I thought it would be nice to do things in a little bit more detail today. So let's begin with looking at the body and tell us what you feel the body is.
Well, this is my big interest, Anna, because I feel although a lot of what I do looking at charts is medical astrology or using their techniques, I feel like I'm really interested in trying to understand what the somatic experience of the body is. What is a body and what does it mean? And when you think about it, everything we know about the world, everything we feel, all our experience, everything we read, everything we hear, everything we see, it's all down to this physical apparatus. And it feels like this is a resonance instrument. And because every part of it is ruled by a sign and every process in it is ruled by a planet, it relates us to the cosmos. We can see that picture of the zodiacal man with the ram on his head and the fish at his feet and all the signs of the zodiac running between, and around him is the greater zodiac, this celestial sphere in which everything lives. And it feels like every one of us is primed in a certain way by our birth chart to pick up certain cosmic influences, and that's our resonance. And our birth chart is like a matrix for the resonance instrument that we are, and all of that lives in our bodies. And when certain influences happen on the outside, they start resonating with what is in that matrix, and that gets this physical instrument starting vibrating and manifesting things. And so even the way I see red is different to the way you see red, and the way I relate to excitement is different to the way you relate to excitement. It's physiologically different. And so when things happen in our bodies, they are key expressions of what we are as this resonance instrument, how we are relating to the cosmos. Our conditions and symptoms and debilities and the way we experience our body is key to how we're trying to evolve in our lifetimes. That's a beginning.
Well, it's interesting because you were talking about color, and I was thinking exactly about that, how our eyes are so individual that what we perceive as a particular color might be perceived as a slightly different color to someone else, particularly where, you have that sort of blurry area between blues and greens, and then oranges and reds and yellows and oranges. That is, to me, the most concrete example of how important it is to understand the uniqueness of our physicality, that even things that we think are going to be universally recognized as being the same may not be. So
Exactly.
that's, and of course, because we can say, oh, it's about it, there's taste. We recognize that taste is individual. And we recognize that how we experience flavor and smell might be individual. But that seems to be a very, we're comfortable with that notion of it being a subjective thing. But even things that we believe to be an objective fact, that red is red, might not be for everybody. So that's
I think we have to say it cannot be. It simply cannot be, because we are unique and individual. And in a way, because we're all sensing everything differently and experiencing everything differently, because of the resonance instrument that we have in our body, then we're creating a world. I'm creating a world out of my vibratory field, but by the way I experience and perceive things, that becomes a world, and it looks like reality for me. It's actually quite mutable, but it feels to me to be pretty solid and pretty much, it must be pretty much what you experience. And it interests me that even neuroscience now is describing reality as a collective hallucination. So we are in a highly mutable place. And it really interests me that according to the kind of experiences that our bodies are having, the world we experience will change. So for example, if we look after ourselves really well and nourish ourselves well and etc., we will be living in a far pleasanter world than if we ignore our needs, ignore our physical requirements, ignore our neurological requirements, ignore our learning requirements, etc. So the world we live in is very much created by what we are in our bodies and how we respond to that.
And what we experience as well, because of body memory. Our bodies actually have memory of experiences. So that's quite a big thing as well. So if we relate this back to the chart, and we see the chart as being a map of an individual's energy, soul, psyche, whatever we want to call it. Tell us about how you go about seeing that chart as a mirror of the body.
Okay, so shall we look at a chart? Shall we look at a chart and think about this? So if I'm looking at a chart, I ask people to tell me what their symptoms are. And for this person, she was very suddenly experiencing quite extreme debility. And that was taking the form of nervous exhaustion, a lot of neurological pain and like tingling, numbness, pain, especially in the hip, buttock, thigh. She experienced a lot of muscle wastage, quite sudden muscle wastage in the buttock. She was having infections that were not responsive to antibiotics. That was the main picture, and extreme tiredness. And so my way in, I guess the context is that we are in a process of evolution, and life is a bit of a cooker. It puts us under evolutionary pressure. And so when I look at a chart, I look in terms of what is the evolution that is trying to happen through the chart, and what is the key difficulty or dilemma in the chart that is hard to raise to consciousness, because what is hard to raise to consciousness is often what then leaks out into the body as a way of bringing it to conscious attention. So I look at this chart and just notice what are the chief challenges. And the first thing I notice is Saturn sitting right on the midheaven. And you can work out from the position of Saturn what this person's age is and the outer planets. She's currently experiencing her second Saturn return. So that tells us that she's in a process of radical review and of sweeping out conditioning that may have persisted for lifetimes, and certainly through the course of this lifetime. And she has this extremely dominant, we could almost say domineering Saturn sitting right on the midheaven. It's the sole dispositor of the chart, and it's opposing the moon. And I certainly see the Saturn and the moon as being the veil of the past, or the veil of other life experience. So Saturn being a strong conditioner of the mental level of experience, and the moon conditioning the emotional level of experience. So for me, those tell me about experiences that she's had formatively and in other lifetimes, perhaps over and over again. And the message here, and you can tell me what you think about it in a moment, but the message for me is Saturn says, life is hard and I am responsible for everything. I have to work really hard. I have to achieve a great deal. I need to be accomplished. It's this Saturn sitting right on the midheaven. This is difficult. That's what it seems to say to me. And it's opposing the moon, which is tender and emotional and easily hurt. And it feels like this dilemma of an overbearing sense of responsibility that denies emotional satisfaction and fulfillment. And go on.
Sorry, I was just thinking, you know, that the moon is the chart ruler, and there's that north node sitting there in Cancer saying, you need to learn to nurture, you need to nurture. So you've got that south node then is in Capricorn, conjunct Mercury. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about what you were saying about the link with past lives, etc. And then we look at that moon and it's sitting in Virgo, which moon in Virgo is so, if it's deriving its sense of security from a drive for perfection, security is never reached. And I always feel that Virgo is physically very, very sensitive.
I think so too. And I think it's also the sign that is most likely to show up in the body, because that's its modus operandi, isn't it? That's what it's tuning us into, how the body works, how the body repairs and maintains itself. It's about that level of understanding. So it's highly somatic in its tendencies.
And that opposition to Saturn then, I feel like it's, although technically speaking, it's an opposition, there's an incongruent feel to this because it's Aquarius. And you think about Aquarius and the drive to be free. She's got Mars in Aquarius, she's in Aquarius. So there's this impulse to be free, to be a maverick, to be a little bit perhaps rebellious. And then there's Saturn. It feels to me like Saturn is chained. And it's because it's in Aquarius, there's that fear of all these things she's yearning for, to be part of a community that's different, that's, you know, outside the norm. But then there's that moon in Virgo that insists on conventionality, perfection within conventionality, and Saturn conjunct the MC. And so there's that feeling to me of denial of the needs, as you said, denying the needs. And I think you're absolutely right. There's something here about previous lives, and it's linked with the family and ancestry because it's the 4th house and 10th that are involved. And then to top it all off, I mean, the real signature for this is that North Node in Cancer saying, you will learn to care for yourself.
Exactly. And it is about care for the self, isn't it? That I will nurture myself.
Yeah.
Cancer in the 1st house.
Yeah.
I will learn to be a mother for myself. And you can see from the pattern in the 4th house that the mothering experience, the early life situation is really fraught with Pluto and Uranus in the 4th house, isn't it? That is a disrupted early life, with, I think, the shadow of something dangerous there.
Yeah, I was actually wondering about father as well, because we do have that sun. And actually, I was just thinking, oh, that Aquarius is sitting in the 9th as well. So
yeah, really desirous of expansion, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Longing for expansion.
And I'm wondering whether there was some sort of tension between father Aquarius and mother Virgo, where one was feeling trapped, where the father felt trapped and just wanted to break free. And that Uranus is there in the 4th house as well, that theme of wanting to break free. So do you feel that this illness was a tap on the shoulder, or more like a club over the head going, excuse me, this isn't working?
Yeah, I mean, this is a person who is very successful in her field of social work, very driven. She does hundreds of things besides her social work, especially in terms of her spiritual life. She does lots of dream work and all kinds of things. Has studied astrology and is a real doer, which that Saturn moon situation speaks of, I think. And of course, Aquarius has got that drive, hasn't it? And
Yeah.
so she's really primed to do a lot. And then it feels like there's been this pattern of doing almost to compensate for what's being denied at the emotional level.
Yes.
And it feels like it is a tap on the shoulder. It's more than a tap on the shoulder, because she's been quite severely debilitated. She's been unable to work for long periods of time this year with these symptoms. It's been quite serious and has not had any, the doctors can't diagnose what's going wrong. So that's alarming for someone with a Virgo moon who really wants to find a sense of order and find some help and have things explained and find a reliable helper. And that hasn't been arriving. So she's had to really persist with the symptoms and persist with the unknowing of what's unfolding. And I think getting increasingly anxious, as the Virgo indicates, about, is something really serious happening here? And I feel that it's almost like this Saturn always brings us, as you believe it, so it is. So it's the belief that life is hard, and Saturn's conjuncting itself, clearing away, another 30 years of conditioning, and perhaps clearing away the whole life of her conditioning. It feels almost like her symptoms are a discharge from the body of what no longer, what doesn't serve the authentic direction, which is, as you said, towards this North Node, towards this Cancerian way of being. And yes, she must satisfy her Sun, Mars in the 9th house in Aquarius. But I think it also needs her to be able to find a way of nurturing herself and almost resting into another part of herself that is not sufficiently explored.
I think also, I was just listening to what you say she does. It sounds like she's expressing the Aquarius and the Pisces. But the problem is that it's almost like she's using those things against herself, because Pisces sometimes feels like it needs to pay rent in order to exist, or to prove its right to exist. And it feels to me like that's what she's doing. She's got to tick all the boxes of the things that she's supposed to do to be a good person, to her own detriment. And that's where the healing needs to be. Because you were talking about the Saturn return, but I think Chiron may have been conjuncting Jupiter at some point.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that, because one of the main features of the chart is this kind of yod configuration between Sun, Mars, Jupiter, focusing down towards Pluto and Uranus. So as Chiron has transited over Jupiter, I mean, it feels like that Jupiter is normally her ally. That's her great way of breaking out, isn't it? Because that takes her into independence, expansion, opportunity. It's really satisfying for her 9th house planets, that Jupiter. It's very buoyant. And it feels like that's been disallowed by Chiron at the moment. It's like, come on, we've really got to figure out how to change the record. This is like a now or never moment, isn't it? The second Saturn return is so critical for conditioning the way we're going to experience the rest of our lives.
I find Chiron transits can be physically brutal. They can really be moments when maybe the body is rebelling, and it's saying, right, I'm not carrying this anymore, and out come the symptoms. So it's interesting that she's going through this.
And the Jupiter rules the 6th house.
And I was just going to say that, with Jupiter ruling the 6th house, I think that there's family stuff here as well that needs to be shed whilst this transit's going on, because it is that 4th house that's being, because by virtue of the yod, that Uranus Pluto in the 4th needs to really be examined, to bring healing, because I think that there's more to this. This is deep ancestral stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And her experience in this lifetime was, she said, I come from a foundation of anxiety. There was just total anxiety in the field of her family life. And her father was alcoholic, which I think is really expressed by that Uranus Pluto there in the 4th house. And with the incredible opposition to Venus and Chiron, that's so fraught, isn't it? This sort of, love and the responsibility of love and the wounding of love, that something so denied in these oppositions running between the 4th and the 10th houses, which I see as mother and father, 4th and 10th, respectively. I think you see it the other way around. But anyway, we have the parents in those houses.
Just at the weekend, I was with a client, wearing my therapist hat for that one. And she's been having to work through big issues with her mother, who is an alcoholic. And that session really was spent mapping out her mother's wounds, because it was about putting her own suffering as a result of the mothering she received into a context that she could understand her mother's condition and behavior. And then because of that, we went back to her grandmother, who had married an alcoholic. So there's the mother. Her father was an alcoholic. But the grandmother turns out to have been extremely controlling. And so when I asked her, so what is she afraid of? Well, her great grandmother, so her grandmother's mother, had committed suicide, had created a suicide pact with her husband, i.e., her grandmother's father. And she had actually carried it through. He was supposed to have jumped from the building with her and didn't in the last moment. So there, I think, is an example of how not individual we actually are when we're looking at the context in which our individuality develops and grows. We are part of a web. And the reason I spent that time with her mapping this out was because she wanted to understand why. And she had been too much in the frame with the pain to consider why. But when she considered why, suddenly it made a huge difference, because it wasn't just her mother rejecting her. Now it was her mother as a suffering human being.
And this is what we see, isn't it, when we start looking at charts intergenerationally, that the resonance instrument that I am relates really strongly to the resonance instruments that my forebears are, and we're part of this, the same unfolding, the same conversation. We definitely, we carry the same resonances. And yeah, and the angle that I always look at is the MCIC, you know, how are we rooted down into that lineage? You know, that's where it's kind of just seeps up into us through the IC, doesn't it? This great tap into the past.
It does. And to just add more detail to the picture, of course, Saturn is the ruler of the 8th house here as well, which also speaks of very deep unconscious patterns. So I think there's so much here. Saturn, the dispositor of the sun, and the sun, the dispositor of the IC here as well.
Yeah, and the symptoms just felt very expressive of like she had a lot of joint pain, coldness, stiffness, soreness, and the muscle wastage. It just felt very Saturny, very Marsy, fatigue and insomnia. You know, that felt like this Sun, Mars, always in overdrive, suddenly just, you know, burning out. So it felt like such a strong expression of the Saturn prison that she's inherited, and the way in which the sun is trying to break out of that, and that the normal way it breaks out is by doing and expanding, but that is just not cutting it at the moment,
Well,
because it's not taking her towards the nurturing quality.
the muscle wastage that you mentioned, that implies an increasing weakness at that level, because you're losing muscle, you're becoming weak. And I was just thinking about that Chiron conjuncting Jupiter. It's in Aries, the dispositor is Mars, and so there's that. And Aries you think of as being, about strength, and Chiron comes along and says, well, you thought you were strong. No, this is the reality.
And it's about learning another kind of strength, isn't it? The strength of being able to hold yourself and contain yourself when you're unwell, to be able to sustain that difficulty and nurture yourself. And so I think that Chiron is guiding her really strongly towards the ascendant qualities and the North Node qualities by denying the other route.
The other thing is that I just spotted the square between Jupiter and the North Node. But actually what I was really thinking about is how Jupiter, if Jupiter is where we put our faith, in Aries, it's putting its faith in being physically strong, physically fit, being, it's all about being the hero and being active. That's where you put your faith. And Chiron comes and says, no, that's not.
Yeah. And this person has been totally identified with that. She's a very active person, done yoga all her life, all the rest of it, exercising every day, doing all the right things. And it was funny because when she suddenly came into this sort of year of debility that she's had this year, she just said, that must be age. It's age. And that was the Saturn story again, wasn't it?
Yes.
You think, well, it's very sort of out of the blue to be age, but it was that. I feel that if she'd allowed herself to believe that, then that would have been a self-fulfilling prophecy. And
yes.
which is, we have to be careful what we think, because that too comes into our bodies, doesn't it?
Most definitely.
So it might be interesting to look at the this is the secondary progress chart of this person. So that's just like a granular look. And so we had, in the natal chart, we had Saturn at 23 Aquarius conjuncting the midheaven. And here we have Mercury picking up that degree in Aries and sitting on the midheaven. So that was interesting to me, that it's kind of creating a channel for the Saturn to come into the conscious mind a little bit more, and perhaps to travel down the nerves, as Mercury is one of the nervous system rulers. So that interested me. And looking at Uranus on the cusp of the second house, and I think the second house is a descriptor of how we experience our bodily selves, our somatic selves. And progress 6 is ruled by Saturn. And you'll notice the Mars, again, we were talking about the energy levels and the muscle wastage, and Mars is on the last degree, or progress Mars on the last degree of the zodiac there, and is imminently going into Aries. And I would think that that is going to be a real turning point for the physical condition that is still ongoing. So it goes into Aries right at the beginning of the new year, and I think that she will find a new level of resource and a new level of energy coming in then.
I was also just looking at the fact that transiting Pluto is square Jupiter as well. And so there's that theme again of Jupiter in Aries, almost under siege. A Chiron transit in the natal, and then Pluto squaring it.
And it picks up the theme of the yod as well, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And the sun is on 8 Aries. Her natal sun's on 9 Aquarius. So when the sun moves to 9, I think that will be uplifting as well.
Yes.
And here's the solar return of this birthday year. And we can't help but notice the very busy 6th house, house of health, with the moon exactly conjunct Mars.
And Cancer rising.
And Cancer rising, and again the 23rd degree is picked up. The degree that Mercury was on in the progress chart and that Saturn's on in the natal chart. And Mercury exactly conjunct Pluto. Showing that this is a time of transformation. This is a time of going deep and bringing stuff into consciousness from depth.
I was wondering whether there were any stresses in terms of relationships this year that may have been contributing to the issue. I can't remember what in the natal chart, but seeing this solar return with such an emphasis on the 7th house has made me wonder that again.
Yeah, well, the partner has been experiencing ill health as well. So that has been an additional level of anxiety and fits into one of this person's general anxiety loops, which is my partner's going to be ill and I'm going to have to look after them. So there's been a sort of fulfillment of that anxiety. And yeah, so I need looking after, and you can't look after me because you're feeling ill too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like, where are the resources in this situation? Very difficult. And this time we've got Neptune sitting right on the midheaven. So that's interesting that the midheaven's been strongly aspected in all 3 of these charts. And it's that place in herself, I feel, that she really needs to interrogate. You know, what does accomplishment look like authentically? What is achievement? You know, what this drive and this work all the time to get myself on the map, what does it actually mean? And I feel like that's the potential transformation of that natal Saturn at this 2nd Saturn return. Is it's not all about denying your needs and working hard, because life is hard and you need to acquire some status to be able to get through. I feel like this Saturn that she's got indicates a great potential for effectiveness and mastery. And I feel that that will come when she acknowledges what her own gifts and talents actually are, and they are considerable at this stage of her life. So
I was also
go on.
I was also thinking that Saturn is in the 8th house. So this is really a year of considering matters of mortality. But then again, that Neptune on the MC, I feel like what it is about is, it seems to me we've got someone here who is wanting to live according to very spiritual principles. And like many people, there is the emphasis on doing what needs to be done to be a spiritual person. But actually, spirituality is not just about doing all of those things. It's about having a deep sense of the sacred and treating everything as sacred, including yourself. Because when you hold that as the tenet by which you live, everything flows from there. And it's not about ticking a list to prove that you're a good person. So this is a trap that we fall into very easily, that we want to be good people. And we can drive ourselves very hard to prove that we're good people. And sometimes we actually just need to not do that and to give ourselves the gentleness and the care that we deserve as sacred beings. Just knowing, I guess what I'm getting at is, and this is so Piscean, it's knowing and understanding that just by being, we are loved, lovable, worthy of love, worthy of respect. All of these things are there just because we are, and there's nothing to prove. And when we
that seems to me to be an expression of faith in life. And it feels that, and she's got that 9th house sun Mars, and here's Jupiter in the 9th house of this solar return chart, kind of bringing that, deep faith in life. And it feels like that, I agree, that's what needs to underpin, when that's there, that is the raft for everything, isn't it? Because somehow meaning is there.
Because then there's flow. Then what you're doing is coming from a healthier place, because it's a place that's about just a natural expression of the love that's inside, rather than it being, this is what I must do in order to be good, which is obviously so easy for us to fall into. But we need to come out of that model and just go, no, actually, spirituality means I am love. I am worthy of love. I don't have to prove anything. And that means that there's room for me in my life. So that means that I can take care of myself in the same way that I might take care of others. I think that Neptune there is shouting that from the rooftops. He's left the sea, has Poseidon, and he's sitting on the rooftops and he's shouting this, hoping that this will be heard at this particular time.
Yeah, it feels like coming towards being from doing, doesn't it? And this is someone who's such a great doer and is marvelously effective and accomplished because of her ability to do. But that doesn't get her where she needs to be in terms of her feeling, which is, I am valuable because I am. And it's coming into that beingness. And if you remember where Neptune is in the natal chart, it's in the 5th house.
Yes.
This strong level of creativity, and Neptune is the esoteric ruler of her rising sign, Cancer. So we can expect quite a refined expression of her creative sense of self, her awareness of her own uniqueness. And it feels like she's been deferring to others to find out who she should be, rather than coming home to herself and realizing that actually there's nothing to achieve on the outside.
Yeah, it's really, I think the message is there's nothing to prove. That's it. There's nothing to prove. It's so simple, isn't it? There's nothing to prove. And I think as well, you know, everybody will be recognizing who she is, but perhaps she isn't recognizing who she is. And that's a very Chiron theme as well, you know. Well, thank you, Kate, for a most illuminating example of how we can be looking at symptoms that we're experiencing in our bodies as messengers for deeper healing that's needed.
Yeah, yeah. And I hope it comes across how specific the symptoms line up with the planetary themes that we've talked about. You know, most of the symptoms were in the hip and the thigh, which is that ninth house Jupiter faith in life stuff.
Certainly.
So, yeah.
Well, the book that everybody needs to read, if they haven't already, is Body of Stars. And I'll be putting a link to that in the description box. If people wanted to learn more about your work, Kate, what do they need to do?
They can look at my blog, which is awenastrology.wordpress.com, AWEN astrology.wordpress.com, and they can contact me through there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure.
And thank you all for watching. And do remember to have a look at my website for courses, guided meditations, and whatever else I might be doing. Until next time, and next time, we are going to be looking at the astrology of James Bond. Until then, goodbye.